evening, viewers, and welcome to another edition of the Business Perspective for January 26, 2012. I am your host, Hulse Alpuche. Tonight we have our final show in the series on public finances, and for this, two very special guests have returned to continue sharing their perspective. Before going to our first break, we would like to thank our sponsors, Brothers Habit Limited, the Angelus Press, Idea Lab Studios, and of course the BCCI Western Union Service, the only network that has been awarded the 5-star Quality Service Award by Western Union. Thank you, and we now go to our first break. Welcome back. Our guests this evening are Mr. Joseph Waight, Financial Secretary of the Government of Belize, and the Honorable Godwin Hulse, Senator representing the private sector. Gentlemen, welcome back, and thanks very much for being with us tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you. Pleasant good evening.
Gentlemen, our last discussion ended on the topic of the looming debt crisis, and Mr. Waight, you said that at this point, the government's approach to the Superbond would be to prepare for a rescheduling of the debt when the payments of principal and interest are set to start in 2019. Before we go there, could you give us a snapshot of our current debt profile?
Certainly. Our total debt, that is domestic and external, is roughly about $1 billion US, or representing about 80% of GDP. The majority, of course, is external debt, and within that external debt, I would say about 900 million, I should say, dollars is external, and about a little more than one half of that is commercial, a single instrument which we refer to as the Superbond. Actually, the proper name is the Government of Belize Bonds Due 2029. So we have a total debt of about $1 billion US, of which the large majority is external, 900 or plus. I'm sorry I didn't bring all the numbers with me, but these are fairly good estimates. And of that 900,000, about 550,000 million, represented by the so-called Superbond. Now, and the remainder is domestic debt, which is largely treasury notes and treasury bills, but that's a different story because we pay those, of course, in Belize dollars. Now, the way the Superbond is structured, it was commenced. It's a product of a rescheduling and a exchange of a number of components. A smaller short-term debt was rolled up into a single instrument, and the terms are from 2007 to 2019, interest only, and from 2019 to 2029. The principal begins to pay down over 10 annual installments. But there's another feature of that debt, and that is really the interest rate steps up in increments over a period of time. For the first 2 years, there was relief, and the interest rate was 4.25%. Years 3 and 4, the interest rate went up to 6%, and then beyond that, it goes to 8.5%. And then 2019, the amortization starts. So essentially, the way it was structured, relief in the beginning to put your house in order, and then the intention was that with the growth in the economy and better financial strength and public finances, we'd be able to meet the stepped-up interest payments going forward. And when time comes in 2019 to start to pay down the debt, we'd have the option then of perhaps refinancing at that time. But to refinance means that you have to be in a strong position to go back to the market and borrow new money to pay old, and that's basically the game plan. To come 2019, by that time, the plan is to manage your public finances to a point where your credit worthiness is restored, where your capacity to borrow better rates, and then to borrow cheaper money to pay back this high cost money and get a further lease on life.
Freedom.
That's essentially the game plan.
You raised two important points there, points that were raised in the last two shows that we had. One is the growth of the economy, and the other is, in effect, fiscal prudence.
Sure.
Now, in speaking to the Auditor General, the retired Auditor General, one of the points that he raised was the fact that in his 6-year term as Auditor General, he's tabled the audit reports, of which, quite frankly, our elected politicians in the House have ignored. I don't know how we can engender fiscal prudence and transparency and accountability and good governance, etc., if the man who writes the report telling you what's going wrong, what should be corrected, is being ignored. That's the first point. The second point, and in the show last week we discussed taxation, and it was quite clear that an element of reform of the business climate had to do with taxation. The fact that we have reducing tariffs, meaning foreign imported goods are becoming cheaper on the domestic market, and also too cheaper on the on our markets, crowding out some of our exports. So it's an urgency to reform tax, but as one of the elements in providing a better business climate to allow the growth to occur.
Indeed.
Yeah, if I may take the first one with the audit reports. As you know, there's a Public Accounts Committee, and traditionally in this country, like so many other so many Commonwealth countries, former colonies of the UK, with the same parliamentary system that we have, the opposition chairs that committee. The problem is that this type of committee within our system should be a bipartisan but non-political committee. It should be one that functions purely to ensure that the regulations where finance are concerned, particularly the appropriation bill, which becomes the law, is followed basically to the letter, and any other aspects to do with appropriation of public finances. And so that committee has the power to summon anybody, including colleagues, to answer any questions which may come up as a result of the Auditor General's report. The Auditor General is supposed to be independent with all the authority under law to carry out his investigations without control from the political directorate or anybody for that matter. That has not worked in Belize, and we are not unique. It's not worked in many other jurisdictions. As you know, I have campaigned for this forever, and I was happy to see that in 2009, when the now government, the Prime Minister, decided to table the 6th Amendment to the Constitution, one of the things he did was to enhance the power of the Senate, particularly with respect to the Auditor General reports, and to give the Senate, since the Senate would not be caught up in the day-to-day politics per se, and they're not elected members who have to be sensitive with their colleagues, give the Senate the power to do exactly that, to receive these reports, to look through them, to summon people, to do all the rest of things. In fact, I think it was born out of the fact that I had moved a motion in the previous government when I was in the Senate to do the Social Security investigations, and you're aware that our current Prime Minister, then leader of the opposition, had some differences with me over that power, notwithstanding that subsequently the courts had said we did have the power. But to ensure that there would be no question of the power, when the 6th Amendment came into force, the power was actually put in the law, in the Constitution. I have tried since then, and as late as last week's Senate meeting, to get the President of the Senate to form a committee which would sit down and do exactly this. Because as these reports come and they are ordered to lie on the table, they die on the table. And therefore, if there's not a committee to which they could be sent that would meet separately and look through it and then send for who they're to send for, etc., and put a report to the Senate on the Auditor General's report, then we are still wasting time. I continue to call, the call continues to fall on deaf ears. Now, the Prime Minister will say, but the power is there and it's up to the Senate. And I don't control them. But the majority of the senators are from the government side, and if they don't wish to move the motion, and if the President doesn't wish to call the committee, there's very little we can do except continue to complain, which I continue to do. And every time I get up to speak on one of these things, I'm given a minute. And please, well, you know, I'm even now being told, like the last meeting, some of my colleagues said, yeah, man, you're becoming redundant. You said it's over and over. But I'll say it ad nauseum as long as I'm there, because it has to happen. Particularly since in 2010 we had the Fiscal Transparency and Responsibility Regulations, 2010, which requires some stepped-up process of reporting and will be full-blown blossom in 2013. I objected to that. I thought it could have happened sooner. I was putting more pressure and more load on my colleague, the financial secretary. But nevertheless, this is the law, this is the law. But come 2013 and the reports are produced, please, we don't want them to lie on the table, because it would have defeated the entire process. And it will not signal to the international community that we are serious. If you're Auditor General, and if the report's coming from the financial secretary and body says, these are issues to look at, then please, man, let us look at them. That is the separation between the policymakers and the policy implementors. Policymakers say this is what you should do. Somebody needs to say it was done. And the political criticism that comes from certain quarters in the media that that they are running things, and I quickly raised this on a show I was last night. Former colleague of mine and former leader of government business in the Senate, Honorable Dickie Bradley, called in to say that, but the structure is that the executive run things, man. That's where the power resides. And what they do, they do. And while, yes, that has been happening, the fact of the matter is we cannot continue in that mindset that we win, we run, what we do. And if these laws are there and we choose not to go by them, well, we got the power. We'll never cut it. Nobody's arguing that. What you're saying is within that power, there is some responsibility. And one of the chief responsibility is to account to the people of Belize for the exercise of that power, particularly where finances are concerned.
I find this particularly relevant when we have politicians at the moment saying, well, you know, you were corrupt and I'm not as corrupt as you. And I think it really runs against the grain. I mean, if you campaign on a platform of transparency, and it goes to every politician, I think really and truly this issue really puts to the forefront the fact that what they're saying about wanting to correct government, wanting to correct the way things are done is, at the end of the day, lip service. They need to show by action that they're serious about it.
You know, we talked about what we need to do as a country to improve our credit rating or credit worthiness, to confront the 2019 when we have to, we would like very much to be in a position to aiming toward a position of strength, financial, better standing, to be able to refinance our debt at the time. One big element, of course, is how one big element of that credit rating is the governance issue. Okay, reserves and everything else comes in, but the governance issue and also governance of the reporting is how people look at you from the outside, as well as people looking at you from inside. And the thing here is that indeed the Fiscal Responsibility and Transparency and Responsibility Act requires a further level of reporting, which is a good first step. But then the question is, what do you do with the report after that? It's supposed to be made public, and then there should be a feedback mechanism to correct what may be reported on as being a deficit or being shortcoming. And really, that is the final stage of the process. The Auditor General does his job. He reports on time. He does his reports on time. The financial statements, we brought them up to date. I think that was a year. We also have a little backlog of supplemental. Yes. All these things to report to, because we have a constituency, not only internal but external as well, looking at Belize to say, well, what is it you're doing?
Are you running it the way you
should?
And
the more this is part of the transparency. It's a critical element of the governance side, and the governance is a critical element of when you're measured to say, okay, what's your sovereign rating? Is it a D minus, a C, or you have to lift that rating to be able to go back out into the market and borrow money. So it's all tied together. It's not too early to start.
Right, and I maintain that. I remember prior to the elections, the government, the Prime Minister himself talked about creating this, I don't remember the exact terms, but this Transparency and Integrity Commission that would be looking at all contracts, etc., etc., etc. Now, whatever you do in that vein, and of course that was on the wave of the massive criticism the previous government had for complete fiscal mismanagement and public finance and reckless public finance management. Now, if you if you set these structures up, I maintain that every country, and just look at the record, that has these structures for reporting and transparency and so where there's no question of this, they move to the top of the class right away. And you then begin to engender that kind of confidence in the country that investors feel very comfortable with, because here you're running really clean government. I think there is an issue that we are still confused with, and even majority, maybe not majority, but some of our politicians are still confused with, that because you have the power to do things, nobody is arguing with that power. You're tested on your judgment at election day. That is the system. Nobody can ever change it and want to change that. So it is not your power to order the financial secretary to build a bridge and the chief engineer, but there's a process to the bridge building, and there's a process to reporting, and there's a process to accounting. And that is all people like myself keep saying. If you get that right, we are good to go. Okay. We're good to go.
And I believe that the underlying sentiment in that too is that everybody in this country should be made to respect the laws. With that, we go to a break. Welcome back. Let me remind you that we can continue this discussion by sharing your thoughts on the topic using the following tools. Via email to businessperspective@belize.org, or you can post a comment on the Chamber's Facebook page, or better yet, you can use the virtual meeting place that is a part of the Chamber's website portal and post your comments there. The address is www.belize.org/VMP. FinSec, we discussed the overall picture of the debt profile. Now, the Superbond and 2019, trying to get a feel for what that means. Where are we as it relates right now to payment for the Superbond? Where will we be in 2019, assuming it remains as is? And add to that your normal debt that you, outside of the Superbond.
Okay. The Superbond is 546 million US dollars total. The Waight structured interest rate, sometimes is referred to as a coupon rate, started out at 4.25%, currently 6% in 2012. This year, August, it increases to 8.5%. At 6%, the annual interest rate on the, in dollars and payments are about 33 million US dollars. When it increases to 8.5%, the requirement, which is this year, the requirement will go up to about $48 million, a step up of about another 15 million US dollars or so. And it continues thereafter from 2012 right through at 8.5%, right through to the end of the term. Come 2019, however, the principal payments start. And that principal payment on the bond is in 10 annual installments. Therefore, come 2019, we will have an interest payment due of about $48 million, and the first principal payment, which would be another 56 million US dollars or so. Together, we're looking at about 104 million US dollars in 2019. That's a very large number. Apart from that, you have your other debt, which is largely bilateral debt that is owed to foreign governments. And of that, 90% is owed to the government of Taiwan, ROC Taiwan. And then there's what we call debt to the multilateral IFIs, international financial institutions like the IDB, the Caribbean Development Bank, and the Caribbean Development World Bank, and others, I think CABE and others. Most of that debt, the interest rate is tied to their cost of capital, which at the moment is quite low. We're looking at about 4.5%, maybe 5% interest. Right. The Taiwan debt is much lower because it's a special bilateral. It's a LIBOR base. LIBOR is about 1%, plus another 1, plus a margin of 2% debt or so. But the real challenge for us is the Superbond and to pay it off. Now, of course, the idea is that over time, the economic situation would be that your economy grows, your GDP grows, and therefore you'll be able to your ratios don't change too much. That is, although your numerator, which is your interest payment going out, is getting larger, at the same time you hope that your that your denominator, which is your GDP, will grow as well. And it's incumbent upon the government to try to do what it can to grow that GDP so that you remain stable and you remain sustainable.
And at the current 2% approximately growth, are we going to cut it, or we need much faster growth?
Well, everything is relative. 2%, I think Belize is one of the 4 countries in the Caribbean that showed positive growth. But we need to step up the growth a little bit more, because you have other claims on your social services to spend on. So really, you'd feel comfortable at maybe a rate of 3.5–4% of sustained growth, not superheating your economy, but at the same time going forward, and also to build your reserves so that your reserves are at a comfortable level to cover not only your months of imports, which is 3–4%, but also to meet your debt.
Right. Now, you give us the figure of 104 million in 2019 as it relates to the super bond, but you didn't give us a figure on the other debt. On average.
The other debt is on average is another another $50 million US dollars or so.
So that's assuming that we don't incur new debt, which we know will, but we're assuming that we can maintain it stable at around there. So in 2019, we're looking at 154 million US, or somewhere in, 300 million plus Belize dollars going out in debt servicing.
It's a big chunk of change.
Well, if you just do, since we're doing wrong numbers, government revenue right now is about 800 million from taxation and other sources that are non-tax income. And when you get to 2019 at the present growth rate, which should go a little bit, maybe we're at $1 billion. If you take out 104 million US, which is 20% basically of your government revenue, that's what you're paying only on the super bond, 20%. So, and that doesn't include your other debt. Now, there are 2 ways to look at it. You also have to hope for the best, and perhaps we find more oil, which would be the quickest source of revenue in terms of then allocating direct payments from that revenue. You could say it's wasting money in a sense, because you'd want that to plow back into the economy to do other things, but you do have to service the debt unless you can restructure it. But we have to brace ourselves for that 20%, which is going to come, because by 2019 government's revenue may be 1.1 billion maybe, or given the present growth and how it's going. The push then, to my mind, between now and 2019 has got to be how you expand businesses to do it. And I have always maintained there are 2 pillars, 2 basic, of the 4 pillars that I identify: agriculture, services, light manufacturing, and tourism, being a service, but a part, if you like. Tourism is one you can continue to push. It's noteworthy that we've been included 11 top spaces in the top 25 for best hotels. I mean, that is something we should be flagging all over the world. Now, that's a serious source of revenue. But then again, we have to get the exports of our goods up, and primarily agricultural goods. There's tremendous demand in the world for food products. It's not going to change, because if you look at the economic position of most of the large countries, including China, who were net exporters some time ago of basic food stuffs, are now net importers. It's not going to change because they're urbanizing, less rural area populations are going. We have that opportunity to help to feed them. We should be pushing and pushing and pushing those products out there. There's no reason why we shouldn't put a concentrated, direct approach on how we get our agricultural exports going and out there. Ships pulling into the port for rice, corn, beans, sugar, and those things that we can do. And it can be done. If we did, and we got the revenue stream up, that government's revenue is, instead of $1 billion, $2 billion, then the debt looks puny. And then you can turn around and say, notwithstanding the fact that we still can't identify all that we got for it, at least we know it is not such a burden in our pockets because we can pay it. And I think, so the focus has got to be not to lament the fact anymore because it's a done deal. Also not to necessarily hope that somebody will be sorry for us while we wish that, but to try to push the things we know. We may find oil, that's not a given, but we can produce foods and goods and services for export, and I think that is where the focus should be placed.
And we should, I think, as a country, both the population and the government of the day learn to live within our means.
You're absolutely right. I mean, that is, I mentioned earlier building of reserves. You build reserves by selling more than you're buying. That is a balance of payments, a balance of trade being surplus. So you export more than you import. The government is a very large part of the economy. I mean, and the challenge for the government is to hold on don't consume more resources out of the economy, but to provide, in turn, use more efficiently the resources we have, and also to provide the investment in infrastructure, all these public goods that a government is supposed to do, but at the same time do it more efficiently and to set the environment so the public sector can grow and expand. The environment by providing the physical infrastructure, better roads and that type of thing, but also the economic environment. You know, a taxation system that would give incentives to investment.
The productivity.
A shift away from direct to indirect taxation, perhaps a shift on some consumption. We talked about lowering of import duties given the liberalization of trade. We belong to the EPA, the Economic Partnership Agreement. Yeah. That dictates that we should bring our rates, tariffs down to a certain level within a certain period of time. We need to get the money from somewhere, but the idea then is to shift to an indirect taxation system, but also to make it as fair and as equitable as possible, so that people have an incentive to pay.
One of the things, gentlemen, that I continue to advocate is that we have to be real. When you look at Europe, for example, and exporting to Europe, I'm happy to say that we are able to have put now sugar for direct consumption on European tables. The sugar that's coming out is awesome. But we still have problems with some of our other products, beans, rice, etc., etc. But they're not such discerning and discriminating palates in our neighboring republics. They're not like we. They eat the same thing that we eat and the same way we eat it, basically. If we're feeding 300,000 people, which is basically our mantra, we have to be self-sufficient. If we target on our minds that we'll be feeding 1.2 million people, which is right around us in Guatemala and Salvador and everywhere, and that is our target. So let's go for that. Then you've quadrupled your production right away. With that market, you can run right across the border. And this kind of thinking is where we have to begin to go, because you won't get all these fancy products into the US. Let's face it, they have too many restrictions and regulations and barriers, non-tariff barriers. You can't get them into Europe, not because we don't have the agreements, but because the consumers there are finicky. And the logistics, and say, the Caribbean is even worse. I mean, they even more pretend to be more high level than we are. And so, but our neighbors, they are gung-ho, right? I mean, the amount of time Guatemalan trucks and other trucks pull over here, and I'm telling you to look for cattle and look for rice and look for beans and look for corn. It's a sin that every time they come, you have to tell you, no, that. Wish you had and just send it. That's the way to begin to go. Pay your taxation, get people to work, get some energy in the place, transportation working, and then government revenue by default is going to increase. And then you can then deal with these other issues you have.
But that is changing tremendously in terms of the informal trade with the neighboring republics. I think as it relates to the productive sector, you mentioned your direct consumption, sugar going into Europe. It raises an important point, and that's the issue of quality and consistency of supply. And I think in that respect, we need tremendous regulatory improvements to allow that to occur.
Yeah.
We need to remove some of the very subjective tools being used, like import licensing and price controls and the rest of it, that quite frankly stifles competition and undermines predictability.
Yeah.
So we absolutely need that level of detailed intervention to provide a business environment that would allow the growth.
Right. I don't think we have to be cautious or shy or or careful about it. The fact is, I'm a free enterprise person. I believe that business roles implies people. You lift. If you can lift the society, if you can lift everybody, if your productivity is up, people are living better. Women and men are dressing nicer, they're driving better cars and so, living in better homes, you're rolling. You don't need to be shy about that. But you can't do that with a governor on, stifling your growth, stifling your productivity, price controls, regulation here and there, limiting, bust the thing open and make people roll. In the private sector, I know for a fact that if a simple case that I have always put forward, yes, the government may want to regulate rice for poor people so there is no exploitation. I don't agree that there would be, but let us say you have that concern. Then the regulatory machine should be the lowest denominator. You take the lowest quality which is acceptable under the international standards and says that quality no more than this price and let the rest roll. It's a shame that Mrs. Housewife has to walk into a store and has only one choice of domestic rice to buy, which you have to take home and pick. She should have the gambit of 65-cent rice to $5 rice, choice is yours. And then I will decide the part of the market I want fit. And then nobody has to protect me. I will know that I will invest in better machinery and equipment and so forth to compete and see where the market is going. And Mrs. Housewife will know how she's spending money. That's the way we need to think. And we need to think that with all our commodities. We can't continue to be regulating because regulation creates inefficiencies. The fact of the matter is because everybody has one fixed control price for rice, why will I clean it? And why will I take out the dirt? And why will I take out the brokens when I get the same price? It makes no sense.
Well, it's the same issue with the sugar industry.
Same issue.
Why should I put fertilizer in the ground if at the factory I'm being paid
The same price.
Now it's changing, which is
right.
a positive development. We must now go to a break and we'll be right back. Welcome back. Gentlemen, when we left a while ago, we were discussing the need to stimulate the economic growth within the private sector, within the productive sector, to be able to reach critical mass to meet that 300 million plus in 2019. What we have not really discussed as yet, and I'd want us to get into, is the public finance side of the issue, of the coin. The fact that over the last 10 years, the government's budget has more or less doubled, somewhere around 425 to 8 change, probably close to $900 million a year this year. And there is this question that while it has doubled, the services have actually declined. The quality of service has declined, the infrastructure has declined. Everybody now in Belize speaks of potholes everywhere in the country, not only Belize City. So we're spending twice as much, receiving half for it. That's one element. The other element is this notion that government can provide, government can become the economic engine, can stimulate growth. Quite frankly, that in my mind is what got us into problems in the first place with the super bond, where government decided that they could borrow and stimulate the economy as if though we did not have to pay back. Unfortunately, we still have echoes of that today, where there's this notion of big government. And yes, government has a role to play as it relates to a social safety net, provision of services, and they do require a tremendous amount of resources for that. But I think we have to understand that at the end of the day, especially under the current circumstances, we cannot continue to borrow ourselves out of debt. FinSec, I've thrown quite a bit at you.
Yeah, how do we start? The thing is, the first point was the growth in the size of the budget over time. And okay, when you look at it, the budget has there's an investment element of the budget, and there's a recurrent element, and certain things, and also the debt service is a big part of that. Okay, so you're paying for past debt service, you're paying for past expenditure in a sense. You're not buying anything new. Also, a big component is your wages and salaries. Now you could say that has a drift or creep going up, and what we call these annual increments. Yeah. You know, 3% annually on average, and it just goes up. You're not really getting, say, 3% more production out of the government. You're paying more wages, and things have expanded too. You're putting in, so you have your wages, you have your pensions. So these are costs that are causing, these are the drivers of your expenditure. Then you have the capital investment program. You have your, and more recently, what we're trying to do is borrow money on commercial, on concessionary terms. The commercial windows are closed, and try to put these into investment, particularly in road infrastructure. And you have them, the Southern Highway and a number of Macau bridges coming up. To lay in a sense the groundwork that would make it more attractive for the private sector to invest. The government itself can't. When we had the downturn in 2008 and the world economic recession and so on, some governments who had the capacity, they pushed a stimulus to try to create employment, and so the Belize didn't have that capacity. We tried to do a little bit, but I mean at 80%, 85% of debt to GDP, we couldn't do that, and it's not desirable. So, but nonetheless, we still managed to hold our own. Going forward, the challenge for any government would be to hold its current costs down, to become more efficient in what it's doing, to get more product out of the business of government, and therefore allow a little more for investment, and also use the policies that we have to encourage private sector investment, to improve the confidence, to improve the cost of utilities, to improve road transportation, public security. There's a number of things that that are required from the government, and the challenge is to provide those things at least an acceptable level while holding your costs down.
No, a number we did not add into the debt profile was the acquisition of the public utilities, and I suspect that government is avoiding placing that as official debt, because there's this assumption that the assets of the companies or the income from the companies will take care of that. Is that an assumption?
Well, the thing is this: at the moment, we're classifying it as a contingent liability. The government has nationalized, taken over the shares of two utility companies. The asset is now the government, the debt is now, there's a compensation that has to be paid, and also whatever debts the company may have comes on. But it's a transition process. First of all, we have to determine, well, we have to agree with the former owners what the compensation, and I'm afraid that is still in the courts, and we're no closer now than we were, say, 6 months ago. But the idea is that, and of course we've passed the 8th Amendment, which says that we'll hold in the public sector in 51, so it's not to resell. One could say that if you could buy it and resell it, but that's not really nationalization in public interest. Right. But then you'd have the proceeds to pay the former owners. The idea is now that we would maintain the majority ownership, the public sector, including Social Security, maintain the majority ownership, run them as efficiently to generate a profit, and the profit then would be able to service over time the compensation payments.
Sorry.
But indeed, I mean, these are contingent liabilities added on top of your direct debt. You're looking at 100% of GDP or so, and that is a worrying factor, especially when it comes to borrowing again internationally.
Right. And I raise that from the debt profile perspective, but also too from the fiscal responsibility element. Mm-hmm. It does not, in my mind, inspire confidence that these businesses will be run properly when the proceeds are being taken out to buy ham and turkey for Christmas. And I'm being very blunt about it, because if we allow it to happen, exactly what has been happening with the public finance, the huge budget, will now occur with the new private public entities. Senator?
Well, there are another two things. I think there are three things that we have to make a little separation in. First and foremost, what FinSec said is absolutely correct. That I'll start with that one, that in fact, as you're increasing government expenditure, you don't necessarily get compensatory increase in productivity, because these are exactly what they say, they're increments, and people, even the public servants, they're not, the public officers, they're not a part of the economy, they're part of it, and therefore cost of living goes up, it affects them, they don't want to lose their job, so somebody has to pay for that. Taxpayers are paying for that, which also includes them too. But that's the first part. And so as the recurrent grows and grows, and it has grown significantly, there's very little you can do about that. And included in the recurrent is the debt service interest and that has to be paid. Then you have your investment portion, which is your capital. There's capital 2, for which we just barely can cover, and capital 3, which would be your new expansion to get you further down the road. We can't cover any at all, so we have to continue to borrow that. Now, when you're looking through your crystal glass, how does this go? If you want to stimulate the economy, and while I don't advocate a return, I never liked it in the first place of government being the direct driver, government has, of course, to facilitate the process. So you need better security, because nobody's going to invest if they're afraid to come to the place. You need good roads, and they have to be maintained, because if I can't get to the place to bring my goods and produce out, it ain't going to happen. I need good airport. I need good port. Port is a worrying issue right now. It's in receivership. That also is, government may wind up having to buy the port. It's another cost, but they can't make the port drop. So all those things have to happen to make us go. Then we're talking about how we finance this for the domestic market now, and I mean for the domestic investors, where they get the funds from. That would be a DFC. People again are looking to government for some injection in there through some mechanism, whatever. All of that has to be critically weighed against now how you spend money on anything else. And this was your point, ham and turkey point, or anything else. I have heard the minister say, kind of like, but while the grass they grow, the horse they starve, if you like, so I do have to help these people. I say, yeah, okay, but you have to help them beyond that. You can't hope that next year they're like little chickens who are not growing up waiting for mother hen to pluck something into their mouth. There have to be something that says to them, this is very, very short term, get it? But you got to get up, I have to give you a hand up rather than a hand out, so you could jump up and get going and be part of this process. But again, you can't say that if there's nothing for them to jump up into. So it's a complex thing. I believe that the forum that we got some time ago, where the Prime Minister
in November
was a good start, something I had advocated for 3 years. Let's get it going. Because it is only when you sit down and you hear and you say, how can we hold hands to make this work? Yeah. How can we move through this? Because we are in this together. There's no room here for criticism. There's room here for cooperation. There's room here for holding hands, and there's room here for walking forward, because it has to happen. The little man on the street, what does he want? He wants a job. At best, that's what he wants. He's never going to invest in anything. He has no money. He wants to work and get a check. And he has one product to sell. He has his time. And you have to be able to use that time skill product that he has to sell you in a business. If you can't buy that from him, then you don't need that, then he still can't sell it. And we have to sit in that mentality rather than he go get a job. If I hire somebody as a driver, but halfway down the road, he run off in the ditch, I don't need that time and a skill. He has to have some quality and some other things to go along. But he would also want to know that he's not driving 1 day a week and then go home, go sit down 3 or 4. He wants to drive every day, because then that enhances his product. So all these things we have to time. What is happening in Belize is that a lot of moves are made, to my mind, without consensus. And so because the consensus is not there, you get the criticism. And then when you get the criticism, then you get the defensiveness of government. Then it slinks down into the politics. Oh, well, we did do this, but oh no, we do that. I think we need to grow out of that. And I challenge government continuously to say, here is what we're going to do. This is what we're going to do it for. And here, and please come on board. Or how can we come on board? Or how we can enhance this? There's no place for a fight with the business community. Please. And there's no need for an olive branch. We're in one team. And if we don't make the team work, it ain't going to work.
Very true.
And that is the way I see that.
You know, I think I heard you say earlier that that the dividends and profits from the nationalized utilities may be spent non-productively. Well, we could get into an argument of what the former owners were doing with the dividends and profits, but it's a small amount of money compared to actually, in a question of a telephone company, the dividends were higher than anticipated. It's that margin that was gone to some social assistance, but some have gone to education. Big investment in education, big investment in health. Our challenge is to get more out of what we're putting in. We've met the Millennium Development Goal as far as percent of a budget and toward education. The thing is to get the quality of education going up, and so it moves toward like a teacher services commission and all of that. But the idea is to try to get more out of your investment, because you can't really extract more out of the economy. As I said in an earlier show, our our tax to GDP ratio is around 22%. That's high regionally, high compared to the Caribbean, high compared to the to Central America. So the question then is, what do you do with it? How you get it more efficient? How you make it more efficient? The government, you're right, you can't spend the be-all and end-all of everything, but it's to use it wisely, to be able to use that as a leverage then to encourage the private sector investment. Yeah.
But,
and confidence, confidence and governance and rule of law.
I not for a second do I dispute that there's a need right now for a bridging of the deepening and widening social divide. There is absolutely action that's required. But I take the senator's view. We don't need handouts. We need hand-ups.
Yeah.
And it's things that we need actions that will yield medium and long-term results.
True.
Yeah. Not a quick fix, feel good.
And you can't have,
disappears.
You don't want to create a welfare-dependent society, because if you do that, then you're looking to a bludgeoning government facility to support that, and it won't happen. I mean, that's one of the arguments they're using in the US right now. One of the things you need to understand, all the countries in the world so far that has gone ahead successfully are those countries that have driven the free enterprise, free market concept, have moved the investment forward, have developed the products and goods, and quite frankly, we are still, unfortunately, in Belize, in almost the Middle Ages in our education concept, in our investment concept, and in our development concept. I mean, with due respect, Ronald Reagan and Reaganomics proved that it was not any longer demand-side economy, but supply-side. You create a product. Nobody wanted an iPhone before one was produced, because you never know what it was. But the minute it's produced, you have riots, everybody want one. That is the kind of thing. But you don't do that by controls and stifling, etc. And also in agricultural products. The housewife of today, the young women in this room, are not my mom. My mom used to starch with cassava starch and squeeze it through a cloth and put it, to wash clothes and starch and iron was a full-time chore. The young women today don't even know what a starch. I mean, because the thing have dynamics and innovation and development have overtaken this process. And our education needs to keep pace, our investment needs to keep pace, and our management systems, governmental management system needs to keep pace, and it has to be done transparently so that people understand. The problem here with government is they're too shrouded in secrecy and holding things too close to their chest, and so everything becomes an argument. We have to spend hours on the talk show, mudslinging back and forth, and it really doesn't help us.
I think we're coming back to the original point on accountability and transparency, and as you're putting it in terms of forward planning, let us know what your plans are so that we can buy in and we can have a productive dialogue. We must now go to our next break. Welcome back. Gentlemen, your closing comments?
Just basically to repeat the theme that I came with, that basically the public financial management remains a challenge. We have this debt situation to deal with. I mean, that is, we have demands on the public purse to provide additional services. Things like security is a big issue. Education, health. So the challenge really for us is to manage the money well, to get more product, more efficiency, more better quality out of the, because we know we can't go back to the taxpayers and ask for very much more. Bearing in mind that we need to not take much more resources out of the private sector, to allow the private sector to lay the foundation. They're the engine of growth. The government is a facilitator. And the challenge then is to facilitate it to a point where it's to provide the correct incentives, to provide the correct tax environment, to allow the private sector to bloom, because only through growth that the debt problem will be solved.
Senator?
Well, I think that one of the things the government needs to do, even coming into an election year, is to declare that this is not a criticism, this is constructive advice. That in fact, if they project the information particularly financial information, in an upfront, open, and transparent manner that can stand the test of time, the problems fall away. Because on the local scene, people have no difficulty in contributing. People will know that this is a responsibility we carry as a society, but they see where their dollars go. Internationally, people have confidence because they begin to know they manage things well. And if they need more help, we are prepared to help them. But if it is shrouded and clouded in secrecy or held tight to your chests and criticisms and comparisons to who did what before and so, it simply creates a maze. And as we all know, nobody sees through that fog. And so you tend to pull on the side and wait till it clears. We don't have that kind of luxury at time. So it behooves us to get our data out there, to make the Auditor General reports be studied, to make the new finance transparency and responsibility regulations come into effect, and do what needs to be done. So the Prime Minister and his government can beat their chest proudly and say, look, boss, maybe you never liked some of the decisions we made, but you can't say that we made them recklessly. Here is how we paid, what we did, what we did, what we did. And then our debate changes from that whole shrouded issue of how money is spent and so to the proper debate of how you spend it and on what you spend it, and then we can entertain that debate.
Thank you, Senator. This is an excellent discussion we've had today. It colors, to a certain extent, quite properly what we will see going on in the next couple of months, where we are, to put it in unorthodox times, we're in, for better words, political silly season. But I think the public must realize that in many instances, it's money is being spent there that either we have at the moment or that we will have to pay for later. Keep a very close eye on the operation of public financing. It's in your interest. Have a good night. Thank you.